Following the Russian invasion in February 2022, Ukraine faced a critical problem. Shipping grain exports via the Black Sea became virtually impossible, and fixing that was vital to the country's economic survival. But three barriers stood in the way. For one, Russia blockaded the region. Any ships trying to move grain through the Bosporus Strait were liable to be sunk before getting anywhere near the pathway that eventually leads to the Mediterranean Sea. For another, Ukraine worried that Russia might attempt a sea landing, a la the D-Day Normandy invasion. To prevent Russian ships from getting close, Ukraine mined its own harbors. And to top it all off, each of these dangers made it impossible for would-be shippers to take out insurance on their journeys. All of that changed after a July 23, 2022 meeting in Istanbul. Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, and the United Nations announced a deal, with an asterisk, to reopen grain shipments along with some other foodstuffs. The resulting agreement is officially called the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Under it, Ukraine will guide commercial ships through the minefields. Then Turkey will examine the outgoing ships to ensure that only grain or fertilizer is leaving the area. On the way in, Turkey will ensure that no weapons are headed to Ukraine. This was a big deal for Kyiv. Prior to the war, Ukraine exported 18 million tons of wheat annually, bringing in $3.6 billion. The agreement is seemingly doing a favor for Ukraine, despite the fact that Russia is at war with it. So what is going on here? One possibility is that it's just a trap. With apologies to the United Nations, international agreements do not have independent third-party enforcement. If a deal is not in a country's best interest, it need not follow through on it. Leadership worldwide recognized this possibility. U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price told reporters that they welcome the announcement of this agreement in principle, but what they're focusing on now is holding Russia accountable for implementing it. Those concerns became further elevated after Russia struck a shipping site along the port city of Odessa less than 24 hours after the agreement was signed. How would Russia gain from such duplicity? The simplest explanation is that it just wastes the time of Ukrainian policymakers, causing them to exert effort to implement the shipping lanes instead of trying to win the war. From a tactical perspective, tracking the escort ships would provide intelligence about possible sea landing routes. It is also possible that in the long run, Ukraine will open more pathways, giving Russia more options. But Ukraine is aware of those possibilities, and it is very likely that Ukrainian artillery is trained on those paths. And they may also be rearranging the mines. Meanwhile, the big-brain strategic play is to keep foreign markets from adjusting. Ukraine exports a lot of grain, but Russia is the world's largest exporter, clocking in at more than 37 million tons annually. It's also one of the few things that have mostly evaded sanctions, due to how critical Russian wheat is to the international food supply. As I discussed in my book on the war, Russia therefore has a vested interest in keeping Ukrainian grain off the market to artificially inflate prices. This would seem to be further reason to keep the blockade running. However, if Ukraine's wheat stays off the market in the long run, other farmers are going to reconsider how they allocate their fields. This will bring down wheat prices from the war levels, though not back to what it would be in an open and efficient market. Consequently, Russia has an odd incentive to keep competitors unsure about whether Ukrainian wheat will come back to the market or not, thereby preventing the market from adjusting. Even so, at least at the time of this recording, the policymakers themselves believe it is likely to work out. After all, Ukraine, Turkey, and the United Nations went through with it. The United States supports it, and the markets have stabilized grain prices somewhat. This would all be weird if any of them anticipated that Russia was going to immediately cancel the deal. Consistent with that, the first ship to go through the system, the Razoni, successfully began its journey on August 1st, headed toward Lebanon, and 4 more ships started their voyage on August 7th. Thus, it seems that our default expectation should be that this will work, with the possibility still out there that Russia may end it prematurely, before its 120-day sunset provision naturally comes to pass. With that in mind, the remaining 4 possibilities explain why Russia has an incentive to follow through on allowing shipments. One of these is straightforward: Russian fertilizer. Although the Ukrainian grain has been the main focus of the agreement, Russia was quietly the beneficiary of a side deal. The United Nations committed to allowing Russian food and fertilizer to be traded free from restrictions. Given Russia's position as the world's largest wheat exporter, keeping its own market access is critical. Disrupting Ukraine's shipments risks terminating the United Nations commitment on Russian exports. This is the classic tit-for-tat style deal that underlies much of international cooperation worldwide and can be self-enforcing. Next up is the possibility of reaching a broader settlement. After a turbulent first month of the war that saw Russia fail to make progress in the heart of Ukraine, things have started to settle. Very little movement along the front lines occurred during June, and even less happened over the course of July. If you are Putin, now looks like a good time to consolidate Russia's gains around the separatist republics and its land bridge to Crimea. Given the money at stake, it is hard to imagine a world in which Ukraine agrees to any sort of ceasefire while its ports are locked down. Opening them could be Russia's first movement toward ending broader combat operations. War is costly, of course, and so settlements exist in principle that leave both parties better off than had they fought to one side's military defeat. We might call that set of settlements a bargaining range. But whether a ceasefire at the status quo is better than continued war from Ukraine's perspective is a different story. One of the reasons for the current slowdown is US shipments of HIMARS, a truck-mounted artillery system. Touted as a great equalizer, Ukraine has used them to hit Russian supply lines and ammunition depots, limiting Russia's ability to keep pushing forward. If Ukraine thinks that this will also weaken Russia's ability to hold captured land over the long term, then the status quo right now is not something that Ukraine should settle at. The disagreement between the two on the eventual outcome may continue, but grain shipments would still be a step toward getting the parties fully back to the bargaining table. It's also possible that Russia is not doing this to help Ukraine at all, but rather to keep up its own popularity abroad. Given the war, it's easy to focus on Ukraine's desire to sell its wheat. But that wheat matters to its buyers as well. Egypt is the largest importer of Ukrainian grain. Other notable Middle East and North African importers include Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, Yemen, Libya, and Jordan. The conventional framing of this problem is that it is a net benefit to Russia. Food scarcity will bring instability to those countries, much like what occurred on the eve of the Arab Spring. In fact, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken believes that we may have already seen these effects in Sri Lanka with the recent popular uprising. But over in the Middle East and North Africa, these problems mean more immigration into Europe and more political divisions for Putin's antagonists. Those problems all exist, but focusing exclusively on them overlooks how Russia has tried to establish better ties with those countries in recent years. Egypt dislikes Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and has often voted with the Western Bloc at the United Nations. Outside of that, though, its criticism has been muted. That would change if the wheat were to forever disappear. There is a similar story with Indonesia, Ukraine's second largest importer. Russia has a larger financial stake here, as Indonesia is a major purchaser of Russian arms. Meanwhile, Pakistan is the third largest importer, and has maintained a policy of neutrality during the conflict. If Russia wants to keep its friendships together, a blockade is a bad way to do that. The last possibility is that free-flowing wheat is actually critical for Russia to keep its war chests afloat because of oil. As is the case whenever there is a disruption to supplies, oil prices became elevated at the start of the war. This has been good for your traditional oil exporting countries, but Russia was not invited to that party. Western sanctions have limited Moscow's access to the market. The result was a plunging price for Urals oil, while the otherwise similarly priced European oil trended higher. The start of the summer saw prices rise across the board, but things cooled down afterward, with Brent prices slightly higher than before, but Urals prices notably lower. Being somewhat close to par is still a victory for Russia, because Putin desperately needs those funds to continue the war effort. OPEC, the cartel of oil-producing countries, has helped Russia here by not substantially raising outputs to take advantage of the higher prices. However, many OPEC countries import large quantities of wheat. This is even more true among countries in OPEC+, a broader ad hoc coalition that formed in 2016. And while Ukraine might not be their primary supplier, they can't just write off the problem. Think about the broader economic consequences of the blockade. These countries are big importers of wheat, but they are not the biggest. Egypt, China, Turkey, and others would also experience a shortfall, and they are going to seek alternative sources for their food needs. That raises the prices for everyone, regardless of whether they are directly connected to Ukraine. These countries have a clear way to punish Russia: extract more oil, lower global prices, and put Russia in a position where it can no longer afford to continue the war. This is why President Biden recently flew to Saudi Arabia, despite more hostile rhetoric on the 2020 campaign trail. It's also why Putin recently made a trip to Iran with the exact opposite intention in mind. Even if those countries do not want to actively interfere in the war, they might ultimately not have a choice. They will need to find a way to make up for the higher prices, and securing more oil revenue is the easiest way to do that. And if prices don't soar in those countries, Russia still must worry that many of them are friendly with Ukrainian wheat importers, and could turn on the taps in solidarity. And that's a snapshot of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Let me know what you think in the comments. And shout out to these guys for correctly identifying that it was John Kerry looking for donuts in Moscow in the last video, which apparently is a thing he used to do when he was traveling around as Secretary of State. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.